In a Georgia prison, a black man, once known as a preacher, was publicly denied the right to pray. Before guards, nurses, and inmates, the white chaplain hurled a Bible to the floor and sneered, "Not for you. You're not worthy." No one knew the man they mocked was Deacon Malcolm Ward, and that one phone call from a bishop would make the entire prison fall silent. Sunday mornings in the prison infirmary always felt like the world was trying to remember what mercy used to sound like. The place smelled of bleach and boiled coffee, of metal beds that had seen more endings than beginnings. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, buzzing out a rhythm that didn't care who was breathing under them. Reverend Cole stood at the far end of the room, near a rolling tray that doubled as an altar. He'd taped a small brass cross to the wall and arranged a chipped chalice and a plate of wafers with the care of a man arranging props, not holy things. The inmates filed in under the guard's watch, their slippers whispering against the tile. Some came for faith, some for 15 minutes out of their cells, and a few just followed the line because it was easier than asking why. Malcolm Ward came in last, pushing the chair of a man whose breath rattled in his chest like loose paper. The dying man's name was Curtis, a quiet soul from cell block D who hadn't stood in weeks. Malcolm had cleaned the blood off his blanket that morning, humming something that might have been a hymn if anyone had cared to listen. "All right, gentlemen," Reverend Cole said, straightening his collar, which sat crooked against his neck. "Let us prepare our hearts." His voice was smooth but flat, a practiced baritone that carried no warmth. The guards leaned on the doorframe, one of them yawning into his sleeve. Cole opened his Bible and began reading from Corinthians, but his eyes wandered the room more than his words did. When they landed on Malcolm, they lingered. Malcolm was taller than most, with gray creeping through his short-cropped hair and hands that looked like they'd built things once. Church pews, maybe, or fences that kept children safe. He kept his head bowed, his mouth moving with the familiar cadence of prayer. The ritual moved forward, slow and mechanical. Cole dipped his fingers into the chalice, lifted a wafer, and murmured, "Body of Christ." One by one, the men came forward, palms open, eyes down. There was a fragile quiet in the line, the kind that almost sounded like hope. When Malcolm reached the front, the dying man still watching from his wheelchair, he lifted his hands the same way he had done 1,000 times before. His palms were broad, scarred, steady. "May I take it for him?" he asked softly, nodding toward Curtis. Cole's jaw tightened. He looked at Malcolm's hands as though they'd touched something unclean. "Not you," he said, his voice carrying farther than it needed to. Malcolm blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "Sir?" "You heard me." Cole's tone sharpened, slicing the quiet. "Communion is for those who've been washed clean, not for the condemned." A few of the men shifted, uncertain whether to look or pretend they hadn't seen. The guard near the door tilted his head, waiting to see where this would go. The air changed, thickened. Malcolm lowered his hands slowly, the wafer's reflection caught in his eyes. "Chaplain," he said gently, "I only wanted to pray with him." Cole took a step closer, his shadow cutting across the wheelchair. "You think prayer is a privilege you can earn back? You think saying a few words makes you righteous again?" The old man in the chair coughed weakly. One of the inmates muttered, "Come on, man," but fell silent when Cole turned toward him. "Not for you," Cole repeated, louder this time, like a sermon he wanted everyone to memorize. "Not today, not ever." Laughter cracked through the room, short, nervous, the kind people use when they're scared to feel pity. A few men smirked just to hide their own shame. Others kept their heads down, lips pressed together. The dying man's breathing hitched, the sound ragged. Malcolm didn't move. His chest rose and fell once, slow, deliberate. He looked down at his hands, then opened them wider, showing they were empty. "Understood," he said quietly. "I'll sit back down." The guard cleared his throat, but said nothing. Cole turned away, pretending to focus on the next man in line. "Body of Christ," he said, dropping a wafer into another palm, his voice trembling just enough to betray satisfaction. Malcolm walked back to his chair at the far end, every step echoing like a drumbeat that refused to stop. He sat beside Curtis and whispered something only the dying man could hear. The older inmate's lips moved, a soundless prayer or sigh. It was hard to tell which. When the service ended, Cole gathered his things with unnecessary precision, stacking the hymnals, wiping the chalice with a cloth. "That's all for today," he announced, dismissing them as if they were school children. The men filed out, 2 by 2, then 1 by 1, until only Malcolm and the guards remained. He stayed behind to straighten the folding chairs, a quiet habit the staff had stopped noticing. He worked in silence, folding, stacking, aligning edges. When he reached the chair he'd used, he paused, resting his hand on the metal back. The faint reflection of the taped cross shimmered in the stainless steel, crooked and small, but still there. Cole passed him on the way out, holding his Bible like a badge. "You think you can shame me with your silence?" he said under his breath. Malcolm didn't look up. "No, sir," he said, his voice steady. "I think silence shames itself." Cole stared at him, searching for anger, for anything he could strike against. But there was only calm, and that calm unsettled him more than defiance ever could. He turned sharply and left, his shoes clacking down the corridor. Malcolm gathered the remaining wafers into their tin and placed them on the cart. He didn't look back at the door or at the guards who lingered, as if waiting for a show that never came. The hum of the lights returned to fill the room, steady and indifferent. He whispered a line from memory, just a fragment, the part that mattered. "Blessed are the poor in spirit." The words barely reached the air, but seemed to land exactly where they needed to. Curtis stirred in his chair, eyes half open. "You didn't have to take that for me," he rasped. Malcolm smiled faintly. "Didn't take it for you," he said. "Took it with you." Outside the infirmary, the hallway buzzed back to life. Radios, keys, boots. The world reset itself as if nothing sacred or cruel had happened. But for a moment, in that small fluorescent room, something unholy had shown its face, and something holy had refused to leave. By the next morning, the story had already spread across the cell blocks like the smell of burnt coffee. Men talked in low tones over breakfast trays, some laughing, others shaking their heads. "Chaplain iced the old man," someone said. "Told him he wasn't clean enough to pray." The guards pretended not to hear, but even they passed the story along in pieces, each retelling adding another ounce of cruelty. By noon, it was legend. By supper, it was gospel. Malcolm kept to his duties as if nothing had happened. He swept the infirmary floors, changed sheets, and carried food trays to the ones too weak to leave their beds. He didn't move slower or faster than usual, didn't look anyone in the eye long enough to invite pity. The men who respected him offered quiet nods. The ones who didn't smirked when he passed. Somewhere between the two, he found peace. The only person who seemed bothered beyond words was Sarah Delaney, the young nurse assigned to the ward 3 days a week. She had watched the whole thing from her station at the far corner, pretending to check inventory while the chaplain made his performance. All night she kept replaying the scene in her head. The moment Reverend Cole's voice rose above the hum of machines, the way Malcolm's shoulders never lifted in anger. It gnawed at her because she couldn't understand that kind of stillness. Most men fought or cursed or broke. He just folded his hands. That morning, she found him restocking bandages. "Mr. Ward," she said carefully, not wanting to sound like pity. "Are you all right after yesterday?" He looked up, eyes calm, voice low. "I'm fine, ma'am. Some things bruise louder than they hurt." Sarah hesitated. He shouldn't have said what he did. Malcolm smiled gently, not the polite kind, but the sort that came from having seen too much. He said it to the room, not to me. Words like that look for a place to land. I just didn't offer one. She didn't know how to answer, so she nodded and left. But his words stayed with her. Later, during her break, she opened the small logbook the infirmary kept for inmate work assignments. There it was. Ward, Malcolm J., custodial detail, D-block rotation. She turned the page and saw a note in the margin, written in older ink. Clergy transfer, revoked. Curiosity got the better of her. When she returned to her desk, she searched his name through the prison's internal database. The file was thin, but enough to pull a thread. Prior occupation, Deacon, St. Augustine Parish, Savannah. She read it twice, then leaned back in her chair. "Deacon?" she whispered. The word felt heavier after what she had witnessed. Meanwhile, the tension in the yard brewed thicker than summer air. A few of the younger inmates found humor in the story, repeating Cole's words like lines from a movie. One called out when Malcolm passed the fence, "Hey, preacher, God's still screening calls?" The others laughed. Malcolm didn't stop. He just adjusted the mop handle over his shoulder and kept walking. The laughter broke apart sooner than expected, replaced by something quieter, shame disguised as silence. That evening, during medication rounds, Sarah found him in the supply room, reading a folded piece of paper so worn the creases had turned soft as cloth. She paused at the door. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." He folded the paper slowly. "You're not." He slid it back into his pocket. "Was that a letter?" she asked before she could stop herself. He nodded. "From my son. Long time ago?" He looked away, as if seeing something beyond the walls. "He was 16 when I came here. He's got a family of his own now." "What does it say?" He smiled again, eyes drifting toward the ceiling light. "It says, 'You don't have to be home to be my home.'" He tapped his chest. Boy always did have a way with words. Sarah felt her throat tighten. "He must miss you." "Maybe," Malcolm said. "But he's doing what he's supposed to, living." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "You were a deacon once." It wasn't a question. He didn't look surprised. "You looked me up." "I had to," she admitted. "After what happened, I needed to know why someone like you would take that and just stand there." Malcolm's face softened with something like amusement. "And what did you find?" "That you shouldn't be here." He shrugged. "A lot of folks shouldn't be where they are. Life still puts us there." Sarah folded her arms, watching him carefully. "You don't seem angry." "Anger's a fine fuel," he said. "Burns hot, burns out. I'm more of a slow fire kind of man." When she left the room, she felt unsettled. Not by his calmness, but by how small her own faith felt next to it. That night she sat in her car in the parking lot, long after her shift ended, the engine off, the windows fogging with her breath. She whispered a prayer she hadn't said in years, not sure if it was for him or for herself. Inside the prison, Reverend Cole walked the corridor with the swagger of a man who believed God shared his address. He passed 2 guards talking about the incident and shot them a look sharp enough to cut. "Any inmate gives you trouble, you write him up," he said. "Especially that one in the infirmary. Thinks he's still holy." The guards nodded, half listening, half uneasy. By the next morning, the buzz of gossip had quieted into a strange, watchful respect. Inmates who once mocked Malcolm now found excuses to speak softer when he passed. Even the guards started greeting him with curt nods, unsure why they did. Something in the air had shifted, not because of force, but because of how he carried the weight laid on him. During lunch, Sarah passed by the infirmary door and saw him kneeling beside Curtis's bed, head bowed. The older man's breath was shallow, his hand resting in Malcolm's larger one. No words were spoken, only that quiet rhythm of 2 hearts trying to remember the same prayer. The cross on the wall above them hung crooked, but the light from the small window touched it just right, as if the sun had found the one place left to land. Sarah felt a strange ache rise in her chest. She didn't know what would come next, whether the chaplain would back down or press harder. But she knew one thing for certain. Whatever battle was unfolding in that place, Malcolm Ward had already chosen his side, and it wasn't vengeance. It was grace, stubborn and steady as breath. He used to tell the young men in his parish that faith wasn't a shield. It was a scar that healed right. Back then, before prison walls and numbered uniforms, Malcolm Ward had been a man people listened to. The church sat on a cracked corner in Savannah, paint peeling, but the choir still filled it with warmth on Sundays. He'd fix the roof by day, teach scripture to restless boys by night. His sermons weren't about fire or fear. They were about holding steady when the wind rose. One of those boys was named Andre Collins. Skinny, always hungry, eyes darting like he expected to be hit. Malcolm had found him sneaking food from the church pantry one summer afternoon. Instead of calling the cops, he'd given him a sandwich and a mop. "You want to eat? You help," he'd said. Andre came back the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the month, he was calling Malcolm Deke. For a while, it seemed like the boy might make it out clean. He worked part-time at the auto shop, joined the choir, even brought his little sister to Sunday school. Malcolm used to drive him home in the church van, warning him about the streets, the easy money, the friends who didn't love him enough to tell him no. Andre would grin and say, "You worry too much, Deke. I'm good." But good never lasted long where temptation paid cash. The night everything broke began with a phone call. It was raining hard enough to drown out sirens, but Malcolm heard them anyway. "They got Andre," someone said. "Corner store robbery gone wrong. Clerk's dead." His heart sank. He found the boy hours later in a police interview room, shivering under fluorescent light, clothes damp, hands shaking. "Tell them the truth," Malcolm urged. "You made a mistake, but you can still start over." Andre's eyes flicked up, red and wet. "I didn't pull the trigger, Deke, I swear. But they said somebody's got to take it." He hesitated, something ugly moving behind his gaze. "If I give them a name, they'll let me walk." Malcolm froze. "You can't do that," he said. "You can't lie your way to freedom." Andre stared at the table. "I already did." The words didn't register at first. When they did, the world went silent. Days later, detectives came knocking at the rectory door. "Malcolm Ward?" one asked, flipping a badge. "We have a warrant." They said there was testimony, fingerprints, a gun found in a dumpster behind the church. He tried to explain how Andre had worked there, how the gun could have been planted, but the truth had already been filed away under irrelevant. The trial was short and mean. The prosecutor painted him as a man who preached by day and stole by night. Andre took the stand, his voice steady, eyes empty. "He told me to keep quiet," he said. "Said the Lord would forgive him." Every word carved a new wound. Malcolm didn't look at him, didn't speak, just folded his hands and prayed the boy would one day feel the weight of what he'd done. The jury took 2 hours. Guilty. The judge spoke about betrayal, about trust violated. 20 years. No chance of parole for 10. The day they took him away, the church bells rang out of habit, not meaning. Parishioners stood on the steps, watching as he was led past in cuffs. He kept his head high. "Keep singing," he told the choir director. "The walls don't stop the echo." It was the last sermon he ever gave, outside of a cage. In prison, the noise was different. The hymns became clanging gates and shouted orders. He learned quickly that silence could be armor. The first month nearly broke him. Letters returned unopened, his wife's handwriting fading into ghost traces. His son Micah sent one last note before the silence swallowed everything. "You don't have to be home to be my home." Malcolm carried it like scripture. Years passed in routines that stripped most men down to gristle and anger. But he found small mercies in work. Mopping floors until they shone, fixing broken sinks, reading to the dying. The chaplain at the time, an older man with kind eyes, let him lead prayer circles on Thursdays. When that man retired, Reverend Cole arrived. A younger, hungrier type, more interested in order than grace. He didn't like the idea of an inmate praying out loud. Said it confused the hierarchy. When Malcolm called him brother, the chaplain corrected him sharply. "It's Reverend Cole to you." From that day on, the man's eyes followed him like a shadow. Now, sitting on his bunk in the dim light of evening count, Malcolm ran a thumb along the edge of Micah's letter, the paper soft from years of folding. The words had faded, but their meaning hadn't. He thought about Andre, wondered if the boy had found peace or just learned to forget. Some nights he dreamed they met again, not in chains, not in anger, just 2 men sitting in the back pew of an empty church, neither one talking. The sound of footsteps outside his cell broke the thought. One of the younger inmates, Harris, lingered near the bars. "Hey, Deke," he whispered, the nickname having survived the years. "Heard what that chaplain did to you? Ain't right, man." Malcolm looked up. "Life's full of things that ain't right," he said. "Doesn't mean we stop doing right." Harris frowned. "Still, you ought to say something. File a complaint or something." "And tell them what?" Malcolm asked. "That a man showed his heart and it was small. That's his burden, not mine." Harris shook his head, muttering as he walked off. But Malcolm stayed seated, the letter resting on his knee. He whispered a prayer for Andre, for Harris, even for Cole. He didn't ask for justice, just strength enough not to harden. The ceiling light flickered, and for a moment he could almost smell the old church again. Wood polish, candle wax, rain on open windows. He closed his eyes and let the memory wash through him like a song with no words, only the ache that comes after the last note fades. The next day, the air in the infirmary felt heavier, like the vents were pumping in something thicker than oxygen. Reverend Cole came earlier than usual, his shoes squeaking across the waxed floor. He didn't speak to anyone, just dropped his clipboard on the counter and stared at Malcolm for a long beat before heading into his office. The door closed harder than it needed to, the sound like a warning. The guards exchanged looks. Sarah pretended to read a chart, though her eyes flicked to Malcolm more than once. He seemed unaware. mopping in wide, steady strokes, humming under his breath. By mid-afternoon, Cole stepped out. His collar was buttoned too tight, his face flushed from something he hadn't named yet. Anger, pride, maybe both. "Ward," he said sharply, "I need a word." The guard straightened, sensing a scene. Malcolm leaned the mop against the wall. "Yes, Reverend." "Inside." Cole turned and walked back into the office without waiting. Malcolm followed, wiping his hands on the side of his uniform. The small room smelled like paper and coffee left too long on a burner. A Bible sat on the desk, spine cracked, a nameplate gleaming in front of it. Chaplain R. Cole. Cole closed the door. "You think you embarrassed me yesterday?" he began. "You think standing there like some martyr makes you righteous?" Malcolm's voice was calm. "No, sir. I wasn't thinking about you." "That's exactly the problem," Cole snapped. "You don't think about where you are. This is my chapel, my rules. You don't get to act like you're still in charge of anything holy." Malcolm took a slow breath. "Holiness doesn't belong to anyone," he said. "Not to me, not to you. It's borrowed." Cole's jaw twitched. "You're clever, I'll give you that. But don't confuse clever with clean." He stepped closer, close enough that Malcolm could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You're here because you broke faith, with the law, with God, with your own kind. Don't stand in my room and pretend you're a man of the cloth." Malcolm met his eyes for the first time. "Pretending's not my strong suit." That simple sentence seemed to push Cole over the edge. He reached for the Bible on the desk and tossed it at Malcolm's feet. "Pick it up," he said. "Let's see how holy those hands are." Malcolm bent, slow and deliberate, and picked it up. He brushed off the dust that wasn't there and set it gently back on the desk. "There," he said quietly. "Looks like it belongs." Cole's face reddened. "You're mocking me." "No," Malcolm said. "I'm trying not to." From the doorway, a faint sound, a cough, a shuffle. Sarah was standing half in the hall, half in the office, a clipboard clutched to her chest. Behind her, 2 guards lingered, Miller and Ruiz. Miller grinned, expecting fireworks. Ruiz looked uneasy, his fingers drumming against his belt. "Everything all right, Reverend?" Sarah asked. Her voice was even, polite, but her eyes flicked to Malcolm. "Fine," Cole said tightly. "This inmate was just leaving." Malcolm didn't move. "You called me in here," he said. Cole's hand twitched toward him, stopping just short of a shove. "Don't test me." "I'm not." Malcolm's tone was soft, but it carried. "I'm just standing." The silence stretched until the hum of the light filled it. Then Cole laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Standing," he said. "You think that makes you strong? You think quiet is noble?" Malcolm took a step back, giving the man space. "Quiet's not noble. It's necessary." The chaplain turned to the guards. "You two ever see a man so proud of being less than he was?" Miller shrugged, uncomfortable now that the script didn't have a punchline. Ruiz looked away. Cole's voice rose. This man was a fraud, lied to his congregation, stole from his own church. Malcolm flinched slightly but didn't speak. Sarah, still in the doorway, tightened her grip on the clipboard. She knew enough of his record to know that wasn't true. Cole saw the flicker of doubt in her face and smiled like a man winning a bad argument. "Ask her," he said, pointing. "Ask the nurse if she believes you're still a holy man." Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came out. She wasn't sure if speaking would make things worse. Malcolm spared her the choice. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Belief isn't a vote." Cole stared at him as though seeing something he couldn't categorize. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he leaned across the desk until his face was inches from Malcolm's. "You remember this," he whispered. "You may fool the rest of them, but I see what you are." Malcolm's heartbeat stayed steady. "Then you're seeing a man trying not to hate you." The words landed heavier than any shout. Cole recoiled, stepping back. "Get out of my office," he barked. Malcolm nodded once and turned to go. As he passed the guards, Miller muttered under his breath, "Man's got ice for blood." Ruiz said nothing. Sarah lingered until the door closed behind Malcolm. "You shouldn't talk to him that way," she said quietly. Cole spun on her. "You forget your place, Nurse Delaney. He's a criminal. Don't mistake civility for innocence." She met his glare. "And don't mistake your title for God's approval." Then she left before her courage could cool. Outside, Malcolm went back to mopping the corridor, his movements unhurried, his face unreadable. Ruiz passed by a few minutes later and stopped. "You okay, Deke?" he asked, the nickname slipping out before he could catch it. Malcolm looked up, surprised but not offended. "I'm fine." Ruiz nodded. "Man like that, he pokes 'cause he's scared you won't bleed." Malcolm gave a small smile. "Then I suppose he'll keep poking." The guard chuckled, shook his head, and walked on. Later that night, Sarah replayed the security footage on the infirmary monitor. She hadn't meant to record, but the camera had been running all day. The sound was muffled, but the image was clear. Cole throwing the Bible, Malcolm setting it back. It wasn't just what happened. It was the stillness afterward, the way everyone in the frame looked smaller, except for him. She saved the clip onto a flash drive, her hands trembling. She didn't know why she was keeping it. Maybe because some truths needed proof before anyone would dare believe them. In his cell, Malcolm sat on his bunk, hands folded, the smell of disinfectant still clinging to his clothes. He thought of Andre again, of how the boy's lies had set the course of his life. But tonight the anger didn't rise. Instead, he felt a strange calm, like the kind that comes right before a storm you've stopped trying to outrun. He whispered a short prayer, not for himself, not even for Cole, but for the strength to stay soft in a place that rewarded hardness. Down the hall, the chaplain sat alone in his office, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. He saw his face and, for a fleeting second, thought he saw Malcolm's calm behind it. He turned off the light. But calm, once seen, doesn't leave easily. The rain started sometime after midnight, soft at first, then steadier, a thin percussion against the roof of the infirmary. The leaks showed themselves the way old wounds do, quietly, through stains that deepened by the hour. Malcolm was on the night cleaning shift, pushing his mop along the main hallway. The bucket wheels squeaked every few feet, a rhythm that settled his mind. He liked the night. No shouting, no boots echoing on tile, just the hum of machines and the sound of men sleeping off their noise. In one of the rooms, a guard called softly, "Ward, you better come. Room 3. Malcolm leaned his mop against the wall and hurried over. On the bed lay Andre Collins, the ghost from his past, thinner than Malcolm remembered, skin pale, chest rising shallow under the hospital blanket. For a moment the world tilted. "Andre," he said, voice low. Andre blinked. "Deke?" His voice was a rasp, dry and small. "You real?" "I'm here," Malcolm said. He pulled the blanket higher, adjusted the pillow. The younger man coughed, blood at the edge of his mouth. "I didn't know you were here," Andre whispered. "I thought, after the trial, I figured they'd send you somewhere else." Malcolm shook his head. Seems we both ended up in the same place. Life has a way of closing circles. Andre's eyes filled with something like shame. I ain't got long. Lungs are done. You want the chaplain? Malcolm asked. Andre laughed weakly. That man? No. He'd probably tell me to confess to you. He turned his head, staring at the ceiling. I already did enough confessing in court. The words hung there, sharp as glass. Malcolm pulled a chair close. You don't owe me anything. Andre swallowed hard. I owe you everything. You tried to save me. I sold you to save myself. His breath caught. They said if I gave them a name, I'd walk. I gave them yours. I thought I'd find peace, but peace don't come when it's built on lies. Malcolm watched him struggle for air. You still breathing? That means there's time to do something with it. Like what? Andre asked. Ain't no making that right. You can try, Malcolm said. Sometimes trying is the only right there is. Andre closed his eyes, and for a while they sat in silence, the rain tapping steady against the glass. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. You still pray? Every day, Malcolm said. Pray for me then. I already have, Malcolm replied. Andre smiled faintly, the kind of smile that knows it's the last one. Then I'm sorry, he said. I just needed you to know. Malcolm reached out and rested a hand on the man's arm. I knew, he said. I just needed you to say it. When Andre drifted to sleep, Malcolm sat beside him until the dawn light found the window. He folded the sheet over Andre's still chest just before the nurse came in. She looked at him, eyes soft. You okay? She asked. He nodded. He was a boy once, he said. They forget that part when they write the reports. Sarah appeared later that morning, tired from her shift. She noticed the covered body, the quiet curve of Malcolm's shoulders. That was your friend? He didn't answer right away. He was my student, he said finally. And my teacher. Teacher? She asked. He taught me what it costs to forgive. He turned toward her, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that doesn't come from work. Sarah hesitated, then reached into her pocket and handed him a small flash drive. I need to show you something, but you have to promise you'll let me handle it. He looked at the device, puzzled. What's on it? The recording, she said, of what happened in Cole's office. The Bible, the yelling. I saved it. Malcolm shook his head. You should delete it. I can't, she said, because what he's doing isn't just wrong. It's cruel, and cruelty rots everything it touches. He smiled sadly. And what do you think happens to people who expose cruelty here? I don't care, she said. My father will. He frowned slightly. Your father? She hesitated, then said, Bishop Delaney. Malcolm stared at her for a moment, the name landing slow. The Bishop Delaney? Yes, she said quietly. He's my dad. He doesn't know yet, but he will by morning. He leaned back, letting the words settle. That's a dangerous game to play, Miss Delaney. Not a game, she said. A reckoning. He didn't answer, just nodded once, the way a man nods at the tide coming in, something inevitable and beyond his reach. That night she sat in the nurse's station, composing an email she rewrote 5 times before hitting send. She attached the video, added a short note. Dad, watch this. Please call me before you speak to anyone else. Then she waited, the rain returning in waves, the minutes stretching long and nervous. Down the corridor, Reverend Cole paced his office, replaying the confrontation in his head, trying to convince himself he'd handled it right. The memory didn't obey. He poured coffee, let it grow cold, then poured another, He didn't see Sarah pass by his door, didn't see the flash of guilt and resolve in her eyes. Malcolm lay awake in his bunk, thinking of Andre, of Micah's letter, of the strange way grace seemed to find its way into the ugliest corners. Somewhere above the storm, he imagined a God too tired to shout, whispering instead through people like Sarah, through the dying, through the ones who still cleaned floors after being told they weren't worthy to pray. He folded his hands, whispered a verse. Nothing fancy, just enough to carry him through the night. By dawn the rain had stopped, leaving behind that raw, clean silence that only comes after something breaks. The flash drive sat in Sarah's pocket like a heartbeat. In the distance, the phone in the chaplain's office began to ring. He didn't pick it up right away. The call came just after lights out. Reverend Cole was still in his office, sleeves rolled, collar undone, writing up his sermon notes for the following week. He liked the sound of his own handwriting, the neat, confident loops of a man who believed the ink itself carried authority. When the phone rang, it startled him. Few people called the chaplain's line that late. He let it ring twice, maybe 3 times, before he picked it up. "Chaplain Cole," he said briskly, already rehearsing a tone of control. A pause, then a voice, measured, calm, a little worn with age. "This is Bishop Delaney," the caller said. "Do you have a moment?" Cole straightened, suddenly conscious of the sweat on his neck. "Yes, of course, Bishop. Always." There was no warmth in the silence that followed. The voice continued, steady but cold enough to draw a shiver. "I've just watched something. A video sent by my daughter, who works under your supervision in the infirmary." Cole felt his pulse kick. "Sir, I can explain." "No," the bishop said, cutting through him like clean glass. "You'll listen first." Cole's mouth opened, closed. The sound of his own breath seemed too loud. "I saw you," the bishop said, "throwing a Bible, raising your voice, mocking a man during what you called holy work. That man, Chaplain, is Deacon Malcolm Ward, ordained by my office in Savannah 15 years ago. His credentials remain valid while his case is under review. Which means you denied the sacrament to a brother of the church." Cole swallowed, the air too tight in his chest. "He's an inmate, Bishop. A convict. He misled his congregation." "You don't get to define grace by a man's status," Delaney interrupted. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You don't get to decide who's worthy to pray. That's not your calling. That's your sin." Cole's hand trembled against the receiver. "I didn't know." "You knew enough," the bishop said. "You saw a man who didn't look like you, who didn't sound like you, and you decided his dignity was expendable. You used the cross as a weapon." The words landed with a weight Cole hadn't expected. He tried to find his footing in the dark, but there wasn't one. "Sir, if you'll allow me to apologize." "You'll do more than apologize," Delaney said. "Tomorrow morning you will conduct service again. You will address him by his title, and you will serve him communion first. Consider this not a request, but instruction. I expect confirmation by noon." The line stayed open long enough for Cole to hear his own silence reflected back. Then the click came, final as a gavel. He sat there a long time, the dial tone buzzing through the receiver, the room shrinking around him. In the hallway, Sarah stood with her back against the wall, hands trembling around the spare keys she'd used to let herself in. She hadn't meant to. Over here. But she couldn't look away once it started. The sound of her father's voice over the phone made her chest tighten. There was pride in it, yes, but also something heavier. Grief, maybe. The weight of knowing what it costs to confront cruelty in your own house of worship. When Cole finally set the phone down, he looked up and saw her standing there. For a long second, neither spoke. Then he said, hoarse, "You sent it." "I did," she said simply. He stared at her like she was someone else entirely. "Do you know what you've done?" "Yes," she said. "I told the truth." He laughed then, a sound without humor. "You think you've done something holy? You've humiliated me." Sarah's eyes glistened, but she didn't flinch. "You humiliated yourself. You just needed someone to hold up the mirror." He stood, moving toward her. "You'll regret this." "I already did," she said softly. "That's why I sent it." For a heartbeat, he looked like a man teetering on the edge of something. Rage or repentance, she couldn't tell which. Then he turned away, muttering under his breath, and slammed the office door. Outside, the corridor lights buzzed faintly, throwing thin shadows on the walls. Sarah walked back toward the infirmary, her steps unsteady but sure. In the quiet room at the end of the hall, Malcolm sat on a chair beside an empty bed, his eyes closed, hands folded around a folded letter. He looked up as she entered. "It's done," she said. "What is?" "My father saw the video." Malcolm studied her face, the mix of exhaustion and courage there. "You did what you thought was right." She nodded, unsure if she believed it yet. "He called your name." He said it out loud. "Deacon Ward." For the first time in days, Malcolm's composure cracked, just a flicker. He remembered. He murmured. "After all these years." Sarah sat across from him. "He said Reverend Cole will hold another service in the morning. You'll be called first." Malcolm leaned back, the faintest smile ghosting his face. "Then I suppose I'll show up on time." "Are you angry?" she asked. "No," he said. "Anger takes energy I'd rather spend on peace." She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and handed him something small, a rosary with a wooden cross, worn smooth. "He gave me this when I left home for nursing school," she said. "I think maybe it was meant for you." Malcolm turned it over in his palm. "You keep it," he said. "You'll need it more than I will." She smiled through tears. "Maybe we both do." The storm outside had eased into drizzle, soft against the barred windows. Cole sat alone in his office, staring at the phone like it might ring again and offer him a way out. It didn't. Somewhere in his chest, a tremor of guilt took shape, an unfamiliar thing he couldn't quite name. He poured himself another cup of coffee, but the taste was bitter. Across the hall, Malcolm prayed, not for victory, not even for justice, but for calm. He prayed for Cole, for Sarah, for the bishop who had remembered his name, and for the men who would wake tomorrow and witness something they didn't yet understand. He prayed until the noise of the prison fell away, leaving only breath and rain and the steady thump of his heart keeping time with both. The phone in the chaplain's office stayed quiet the rest of the night. But its silence wasn't peace. It was waiting. And when the dawn came creeping in through the narrow windows, the light looked almost like mercy, though no one dared call it that yet. By the time morning rolled around, word had already traveled through the blocks. Nobody knew exactly what had happened during the night, but everyone could sense a shift in the air. Guards moved quieter, inmates spoke softer. Even the usual buzz of the intercom seemed to hesitate before breaking the stillness. The infirmary had been cleaned spotless, every chair lined up in near-perfect symmetry. The taped cross on the wall had been replaced with a wooden one, simple but straight. It looked borrowed from some forgotten storage closet, as if someone had finally remembered what sacred things were supposed to look like. Reverend Cole stood at the front, his Bible clutched tight, collar fixed and too white against his flushed skin. He looked smaller than usual, shoulders rounded, eyes hollowed from a night without sleep. The guards filed in first, then the inmates, their faces cautious, curious. Sarah moved quietly along the side wall, organizing communion cups, pretending not to notice Cole's shaking hands. Malcolm entered last, walking with the same steady gait he'd always had, as if the world could still be balanced one step at a time. Every head turned. The whisper ran like a current. "That's him. The one from yesterday." Some men nodded in silent respect. Others just watched, uncertain. He didn't look at any of them. He simply went to his usual seat near the back, folded his hands, and waited. Cole cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Let us begin," he said, voice thinner than usual. He read the scripture mechanically, stumbling once over a line he'd probably said 100 times before. When it came time for communion, his hands hovered over the wafer tray. Sarah caught the tremor in his fingers. He looked up, scanning the room, his gaze finally settling on Malcolm. For a heartbeat, the two men just stared at each other. The one with authority, the other with quiet power he couldn't quite name. Then Cole spoke, his voice lower, stripped of its old confidence. "Deacon Ward," he said. The words hung there like something foreign that had to find its meaning as it fell. The room went still. No one moved, not even the guards. Malcolm stood, slow but certain, the way a man does when he knows what it costs to rise. He walked down the aisle, the murmur of clothes and breathing following him. Cole's throat tightened around the next words. "If you will come forward." Malcolm stopped in front of him. Cole's eyes dropped to the floor, then back to the wafer in his hand. "Body of Christ," he said quietly, voice almost breaking. Malcolm reached out, taking the wafer with care, as if holding something fragile enough to disappear. "Peace," he said. "Do right." Cole's jaw trembled. "I am sorry," he whispered, just loud enough for the front row to hear. Malcolm nodded once. "Then make it mean something." He stepped aside, letting the next man in line approach. The rhythm of the har service continued, slower now, quieter, as though everyone present was afraid to speak too loudly in the presence of something bigger than them. The wafer passed from hand to hand. The cup followed, and with each step, the air felt less like punishment and more like release. When the last inmate had been served, the line dissolved into uneasy stillness. Men who had mocked the day before found themselves staring at their shoes. A few lifted their eyes toward Malcolm, some nodding slightly, others just watching him the way one watches a man returning from a storm, still carrying its rain on his shoulders. From the back, a voice cracked the silence. One of the younger inmates, the kind who'd laughed loudest the day before. "Respect, Deacon," he said softly, almost like a confession. A few more voices joined. "Amen." "Sir, peace." The words rippled across the room, quiet but steady, like the start of a hymn no one knew the words to, but somehow everyone understood. Sarah stood near the side table, her eyes wet. She'd seen plenty of medical miracles in her time, hearts restarted, lungs revived. But nothing like this. This wasn't medicine. It was dignity rediscovered, the kind that didn't need permission. When the service ended, the men didn't rush out. They lingered, folding chairs, straightening hymnals. Malcolm helped without being asked, stacking the chairs against the wall. Cole approached him slowly, stopping a few feet away. "I've been suspended," he said quietly, like a man admitting a wound he couldn't bandage. "Pending review." Malcolm looked at him, his face unreadable. "Then you'll have time to listen," he said. To what? Cole asked, almost pleading. To the quiet, Malcolm said. It's where God hides when we make too much noise. Cole lowered his eyes. I don't know how to fix this. Start with yourself, Malcolm said. The rest follows. Cole nodded faintly, tears pricking the corners of his eyes. He extended his hand, uncertain if it would be taken. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He shook it, firm and brief, a gesture of peace rather than friendship. When Cole left the room, Sarah approached. He'll remember that, she said. Malcolm smiled faintly. That's between him and his mirror. Outside, the afternoon light broke through the clouds, pale gold spilling across the barred windows. The men filed back to their cells, quieter than usual, like people who just left a funeral but felt lighter instead of burdened. Sarah gathered the leftover wafers, packing them away, then looked back at Malcolm. You really think he can change? He wiped his hands on a towel and set it aside. Everyone can, he said. Some just take longer to believe it. A guard called count, and the moment fractured. But even as the doors closed and the echoes of footsteps faded, the room still held a kind of glow, the residue of a mercy neither forced nor earned. The new wooden cross cast a shadow on the floor, and for the first time, it didn't look crooked. Later that evening, when Malcolm returned to his bunk, a folded note waited on the pillow. No name, just 6 words written in neat, careful script. Thank you for not hating me. He didn't need to guess who'd written it. He sat down, unfolded his letter from Micah, and placed the two side by side. The ink of one had faded, but the message of both was clear enough to read without light. He smiled, a quiet, tired smile, and whispered to the empty cell, Peace, always. In the chapel, Sarah lingered one last time before turning out the lights. The air still smelled faintly of bread and wax. She looked at the chair where Malcolm had knelt and thought, not for the first time, that holiness wasn't in the ritual. It was in the man who had refused to let cruelty define him. She closed the door softly behind her. In the silence that followed, even the walls seemed to breathe easier. The days that followed passed with the strange calm that comes after a long storm. The prison seemed quieter, as if even the walls were tired of echoing anger. Reverend Cole was gone by midweek, transferred to a pastoral training program, pending reassessment, the memo said. His name came off the chapel door, replaced by a paper sign that read, Interim Services, Visiting Clergy. The men noticed. They always noticed. Gossip traveled, but this time it didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like balance finding its way home. Sarah worked her rounds in near silence. The guard spoke to her differently now, less like someone in uniform, more like someone who had seen too much but didn't break. When she passed Malcolm in the corridor, she gave him a nod that carried more gratitude than words. They didn't talk about what had happened. They didn't need to. The look between them said enough. The thing they'd set in motion had done what it needed to do. A few nights later, she found him sitting by the window near the infirmary, polishing the brass handles on a mop bucket. You still working? She asked. Work's easier than sleep, he said, smiling faintly. Do you miss it? Church? He asked. No, she said, being free. He thought about it for a while. Freedom's not a place, he said. It's a posture. You can bow your head in a field or in a cell. It means the same thing if you know who you're bowing to. She watched him, trying to memorize that calm. My father said he'll be coming to visit soon. Wants to see the place for himself. That'll stir the pot, he said. Sarah laughed softly. He said something else, too. He said he remembered the day he ordained you. Said you gave the shortest speech he'd ever heard. Malcolm chuckled, the sound warm and deep. I only said what mattered. Let me serve quietly. Guess I'm still doing that. The next morning dawned sharp and cold, sunlight pooling through the barred windows in long stripes. In the infirmary chapel, a new priest, a soft-spoken man with silver hair and a steady gaze, prepared the altar. He greeted every inmate with the same word, brother. No titles, no categories, just brother. Malcolm sat near the back again, the habit of humility too old to unlearn. The priest looked around and smiled when he saw him. Deacon Ward, he said warmly. I hear this room has seen both sin and grace. We'll start from grace today. The men chuckled softly, tension breaking like thin ice. The service was simple, no theatrics, no voice raised above another. The bread was passed, the cups shared. When it was over, nobody hurried to leave. They lingered, talking quietly, like people who'd just come back from a long absence and didn't want to lose the sound of each other's company. Afterward, Malcolm stayed behind to help straighten chairs. A young inmate named Harris, who had once told him to fight, back joined him. You think Cole ever gets what he did wrong? The boy asked. Malcolm wiped his hands on a towel, thinking, maybe not today, but sooner or later, a man meets the echo of his own voice. Then he's got to listen. Harris frowned. What if he don't? Malcolm smiled gently. Then the echo gets louder. That afternoon, Sarah walked into the infirmary carrying a small box. Mail call for you, she said. He took it carefully. Inside was a letter sealed in neat handwriting and a small wooden cross. He unfolded the note. It was from Bishop Delaney. Deacon Ward, your patience taught my daughter what sermons never could. I pray you never lose that peace you've carried through every storm. Grace moves quiet, but it moves everything. Malcolm held the letter for a long time before closing it. He's a good man, he said. So are you, Sarah replied. He shook his head. I'm a man trying to stay good. There's a difference. Later that evening, when the last light of day slipped low across the floor, he took a walk along the corridor outside the chapel. The walls were the same dull beige, the air the same antiseptic chill, but something small had changed. The guards nodded when he passed, not out of duty, but out of recognition. One even said, "Evening, Deacon." The word didn't sound strange anymore. It fit. He stopped by the window overlooking the yard. The rain had left shallow puddles that caught the fading sunlight, turning them into patches of gold. He stood there a while, watching the reflection of the sky ripple every time a drop fell from the eaves. He thought of Andre, of Sarah, of Cole, of his son Micah. Each one had carved something into him: pain, hope, lesson, grace. He thought about the strange arithmetic of mercy, how giving it away always seemed to leave you with more. When the final count bell rang, he headed back toward the infirmary. Sarah was closing up for the night, and the new priest was finishing his notes. Good night, Deacon, they said almost in unison. He smiled, tipping his head as he passed. In his cell, the light was dim and soft. On the small metal desk lay Micah's old letter, the edges worn thin from years of unfolding. Beside it, he placed the bishop's note and the wooden cross. He read both again under the weak bulb, his lips moving silently, not in prayer, but in gratitude. He sat back on his bunk, listening to the familiar hum of the prison settling into its nightly rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, someone was humming a hymn, off-key, low, but honest. The melody floated down the corridor and found him, gentle as breath. He closed his eyes and let it carry him. For the first time in a long while, he felt the world tilt toward something right. Justice hadn't thundered in with sirens or headlines. It had walked in quietly, in borrowed shoes, through people who decided to do one decent thing when it counted. That was enough. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing the flag above the yard until it fluttered once, then fell still. In the chapel, the candles Sarah had forgotten to snuff burned steady, the flames small but unwavering. If anyone had been there to see, they'd have noticed how the light spilled across the floor, cutting through the bars like something deliberate. Malcolm whispered into the stillness, the same way old men talk when they're not sure if anyone's listening, but hope someone is. They said I wasn't worthy to pray, he murmured. Then the bishop called me Deacon. He smiled faintly. And maybe that's all the sermon the world ever needed. He leaned back against the wall, eyes closing, the candlelight catching on the curve of the cross. The hum of the prison softened to a heartbeat's pace. Somewhere, far beyond the concrete and wire, a church bell rang. Distant, steady, forgiving.